Hi, buddy. This is Matt.
And this is Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our special guest. One of our very first special guests has now returned. It is Douglas Wolk. Welcome back, Douglas. So for those of you who don't know, Douglas is the author of one of the, what's the word I'm looking for, canonical texts of what we do here. He is the author of All the Marvels, what's the subtitle of All the Marvels?
It's different subtitles depending what country you're in, but in the US it is... Wait, do I remember the subtitle of my own book?
I never remember the subtitle of my own book.
Oh no. A Journey to the Ends of the Biggest Story Ever Told.
Which is an absolutely wonderful book in which he read every single Marvel comic that had been published up to the publication date of that book and wrote about them. He did not write about every single one, or else the book would have been millions of pages long. But instead, he wrote about just the ones that most interested him. Welcome back, Douglas. How have you been?
Really good, and it's fantastic to be back.
Great.
So you are now officially a friend of the pod.
Is there like a three-letter acronym that comes with that?
Sure. We'll call you FOP. Why not?
Okay, I'm a FOP. Great.
You're our official FOP. Last time you came on, we did not discuss any month's issues. Your book was such a monumental achievement that we just devoted a whole episode to that, to discussing the book. And this month, we said, hey, we never had Douglas on to actually talk about issues. Let's have him come on for a month. And we asked you about 6 months ago, do you want to come on? And you said, yes, I'd like to come on. And I'd specifically like to come on for February 1968. So why did you say February 1968, Douglas?
February 1968 because it's such a weird transitional month for Marvel. The size of the original art had just recently changed. I don't know if you've talked about that in the last couple episodes.
No, I did not know this. What happened?
It came up in the book by Jeff Ryan, but we didn't get into it specifically, but it was mentioned in there. So, Douglas, why don't you fill us in on more information on that?
So, in late 1967... Marvel's artwork went from what they call twice up, which had been the industry standard up to that point, which is to say the original art was twice as big in every dimension as the final printed artwork. So they were working with a really big canvas. And after that point in 1967, they switched to a smaller page dimension. I don't know exactly what the page dimension was, but it's the dimensions that are still used now for a comic book original art generally.
So that is 10 inches by 15 inches if you are staying within the traditional panel borders. The paper itself is 11 by 17. And these days, now that you can do full bleed, it gets a little more confusing. But 10 by 15 was basically the live art area.
Yeah. So Marvel's artists were suddenly working with a smaller canvas. And you see that coming out in the storytelling because it's the artists who are pacing out the story, and suddenly they're using fewer and larger panels on each page.
I guess they would. And
so these stories fly by very quickly. It's also a moment where Marvel's distribution was changing. And the upshot of that was that they could publish more titles each month. And what that meant was that the series that had been having 2 stories in each issue, Tales of Suspense, Tales to Astonish, Strange Tales, were about to split into 2 comics apiece. And that meant that their staff had to increase. And so they're bringing in more writers, they're bringing in more artists, and everything is just a little bit like nobody knows what's happening next. A couple of these issues that we're looking at, if you look at the original issues, the ad pages in them, there's an ad for the Frank Zappa album, We're Only in It for the Money.
Yes. It's really shocking. It's the most shocking ad we've ever had in a Marvel comic up to this point. It really feels like, whoa, am I reading something dangerous and counterculture-y here? Am I buying this in a head shop? Where is this coming from? It's a really shocking ad.
Stan Lee loved to talk about how he had, college readers as his audience. But this was the first time that there was an ad that really was aimed at that crowd. It was not aimed at kids. It was not really aimed at high school students. It was aimed at hipsters, collegiate hipsters. And that's something that has to have shifted the way that stories were being told and the stories that were being told. So there's a lot of stuff that is happening right about now. You can also see it in Spider-Man, where after John Romita has been drawing for a good long while, suddenly he's got Don Heck coming in to help him with finished pencils.
Oh, no. But not as tragic as it could be, as I mentioned last week.
Not at all as tragic as it could be. And Romita's still doing a lot of the plotting. But I think it's around that point that Romita starts working on what's going to be the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine a few months later, which was a big 68-page black and white newsstand magazine that was Marvel reaching out to a new audience and had to have a bunch of lead time because it was going to be a more than triple length story in there. So he's stepping back a little bit from doing finished pencils on Spider-Man. There's all this stuff that's all happening at once, and it's just a really interesting kind of everything's in the middle of, wait, this is not quite the way we did it a year ago moment.
Yes. I don't want to spoil things, but one of the reasons you specifically said you wanted to do this month was because you wanted to do Not Brand Ec.
Yeah.
Usually we don't do Not Brand Ec. We've never discussed Not Brand Ec on this podcast, but we decided just for you, since it was one of the reasons you chose this month, we would go ahead and do it.
Thank you.
So I guess when we talk about Not Brand Ec, we'll talk about why you wanted to cover it. But I know that was one of your reasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just one more thing before we begin, and it's going to be a huge thing, but we can keep it short. The number one thing that I regretted last time we had you on, Douglas, as someone who had read every single Marvel comic, is I didn't ask you, what is your all-time favorite Marvel comic? So let me go ahead and officially ask you now, what is your all-time favorite Marvel comic, and why is it Dakota North?
It changes day by day. It really, really does. Whatever I'm in the mood for. There are days when it is Master of Kung Fu. There are days when it is Jim Starlin's Warlock. There are days when it's the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl.
Really?
There are days when it's Rise of the Powers of X.
Ah, that's Jonathan Hickman?
That's actually Kieran Gillen. It's his end to the Krakoa story, but House of X, Powers of 10, like, I can go on about the Hickman and post-Hickman X-Men stuff all day.
Oh, wow.
I read every one of those Krakoa comics when they were coming out, like the day they came out. I absolutely loved that whole project. As messy and weird as it was, like, it did things that have never been done before in comics, and I love it.
Well, you didn't get a chance to write about those in your book, so they'll have to go in the sequel.
Sure didn't, yeah.
Exciting.
You'll have to do supplements, like when you bought the encyclopedia, and then they would sell you on the update supplements as you went by. You're going to need to do that in your book.
I actually printed up 2 extra little chapbooks that I had on the book tour. One was a chapter that got cut from the book, and one was this very strange chapter that would not have belonged in the book. But so there's little supplements.
Great.
Cool. We keep saying we're going to begin, but it occurs to me I should also quickly ask you, what book are you working on now?
There's a couple of books that might be possibilities. I am working on proposals actually for 2 different books. One of them is comics related, one of them is not at all comics related, and we'll see what ends up happening.
All right. Well, if that's all you can tell us, that's all you can tell us. Exciting. If you're still in proposal form, I can understand why you have to say all you can say. Okay, everybody. Well, should we go ahead and jump into the books of February 1968?
I believe we should. So, Amazing Spider-Man 57, featuring the power of Kazar. You may like this yarn or loathe it, but we promise you this, you'll never forget it. I'm like, I don't know, it's not the least forgettable story that we've ever heard in Spider-Man, but okay, sure, we'll give you that. So the coming of Kazar, it's surprise time again. Not only did Smilin' Stan Lee and Jazzy Johnny Romita put this thriller together, but Dashin' Don Heck finished the penciling, aided by Mickey DeMeo embellisher and Sam Rosen letterer. Heroes one and all. Again, Mickey DeMeo being Mike Esposito. In the previous issue, Spider-Man had gotten amnesia, or I guess he had actually gotten amnesia
like 3 issues ago at this point, a while ago.
At the end of the issue preceding this issue. And he still has amnesia to the point where he doesn't know where to go. He doesn't know where to sleep. He doesn't know how to get food. He ends up stealing food from some swanky penthouse party that is going on. And
I've got to say that, so generally speaking, the Heck penciling, Heck is being squeezed in this Romito DeMeo sandwich. And is generally having the life squeezed out of him, thankfully. There's very little Don Heck visible in these pages. However, I've got to blame somebody here, so I'm going to blame Heck for this first page, this splash page, where the perspective is way off in terms of the awning.
Oh, you're right.
Is flat with us, but the actual patio of the building is diagonal to us. And something is off there, unless it's supposed to be built that way, unless it's supposed to be modern art, modern architecture or something.
You're right. I had not caught that at all. Although one thing I didn't mention is on the cover, Spider-Man is up on the corner of a building and being leapt at by both Kazar and Zabu, who it's a little difficult to figure out how they got to their leaping off points, why they would have been there, and what is going to happen to them once they get to the end of their leap with either a spider in their mouths or not. One way or the other, as I think I said online, it looks like Zabu's about to do a Don Gatto one way or the other.
Yes. Steve, at any point in the Marvel Universe, you can leap at somebody over a New York City street and assume there will be a flagpole there to catch you, and you'll be fine.
Yes. Although, and also, as we'll see later, when Zabu, it's like, how is Zabu getting to the tops of these buildings? Is he just waiting and hitting a button on the elevator and then coming up? And so it's starting to rain. Peter Parker, or Spider-Man, he didn't even know that he is Peter Parker, can't figure out where to go. He finally ends up getting into, it looks like, Grand Central Station.
Accurately drawn Grand Central Station.
Okay.
It is.
Good.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever really been inside Grand Central Station before, but he finds a little nook he can sleep in there. Meanwhile, Aunt May is very worried about him and ends up passing out or having some kind of medical emergency. Of course, she's now living with Mrs. Watson, who is now basically her housemate, who then is calling the doctor. John Jameson is getting reamed out for letting Spider-Man get away at the end of last issue. He is defending himself. The only one who really seems to be coming in on his side is Captain Stacy, who was just introduced in the previous issue. John Jonah Jameson. That is his name, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, one way or the other, so. Triple J is really upset with his son. And he's like, well, if you won't do anything about Spider-Man, I will. Apropos of nothing, Kazar is coming to the U.S. Now, one thing I like to point out about Kazar is that when he has his Tarzan dialogue, he has to be saying it in a posh English accent. I mean, he's British nobility. Right?
Yeah.
So I would love to hear someone who speaks naturally in a posh English accent read this dialogue and try to figure out exactly how that would sound, because I can't quite put it together in my head.
I assume that Kazar is really, really good at code switching.
He might be kind of like Tarzan canonically, he can go back and forth from savagery to English nobleman who speaks with a French accent.
Yeah, it totally depends on who's writing Tarzan, whether or not he speaks like a brute or whether he speaks like a sophisticate.
Yes.
And Kazar, that's true of Kazar to a certain extent as well. By the time we were kids and reading comics, Kazar no longer talked like a brute.
Yeah, I don't really remember. They kept on trying to make Kazar happen and just kept on not happening. So somehow he's gotten some special dispensation to be able to bring his saber-toothed tiger with him through New York City.
Are you going to say no to him? If he asks, hey, can I bring my saber-toothed tiger in here? Do you say no to Kazar? You do not.
Okay, so JJJ is able to find his hotel room, Kazar's hotel room, knocks on the door. Zabu greets him there, and he almost faints. It's a funny little sequence. And JJJ is trying to convince Kazar that Spider-Man is a menace and that Kazar can do a good deed by trying to bring this criminal in. Harry Osborn, in his apartment that he shares with Pete, he's once again just feeling kind of depressed that he was like, I thought I was going to have this fun roommate sort of thing going on with Pete, and I just never see the guy. And he goes ahead and decides to try to search through Pete's room, which after a while, I'm like, I probably wouldn't blame the guy too much. But he finds some of Pete's Spider-Man equipment, particularly a spider tracer, in Pete's room, and comes to the conclusion that the reason Pete isn't anywhere is that Spider-Man must have captured him. So Spider-Man hears this radio broadcast that's being listened to by a window washer that is, once again, giving some exposition here that I don't know that a radio broadcast would really be giving. And it says, only one voice so far has been raised in the web spinner's defense. Air Force Colonel John Jameson still supports Spider-Man's innocence. But the question still remains, why did the masked mystery man cause the disappearance of young Peter Parker?
I would like to add that last bit, but the question still remains, that is something that was added pretty late in the game, because it is not the same lettering as the rest of the issue.
Oh,
okay. That's interesting.
Interesting. So, but yeah, I'm like, how does anybody know who Peter Parker is and that he's missing and has any idea that it would be connected to Spider-Man? It just seems like a complete non sequitur. But Spider-Man hears this, doesn't put together the whole thing that, hey, I'm Peter Parker. But, well, I guess he does kind of. He says, Peter Parker, wonder why that name rings a bell. But he's going to go off and find John Jameson because he knows that he is innocent, or at least suspects that he's innocent. So he figures he might be able to help him. Happens to swing right by the hospital or doctor's room where Aunt May is passed out without knowing anything about it.
Aunt May often ends up with doctor's rooms where you could see Spider-Man swinging by outside the window of her hospital rooms. I think she specifically requests those.
And he apparently does have a little twinge of his spider sense go off as he goes by. He's like, wait, why do I get a weird feeling going by there? So somehow he's able to figure out what window in New York City he needs to fly into in order to find both John Jameson and Captain Stacy. I'm not entirely sure how you figure that out, but he does. He lets them in on the secret that he has lost his memory, and they're like, oh, that might explain a lot. In comes Gwen Stacy, of course, Captain Stacy's daughter, and she is freaking out at Spider-Man because she believes what she just heard on the radio, that Spider-Man might be responsible for Peter's disappearance. So Spider-Man's like, oh, this is too much heat, I'm getting out of here, even though they're like, wait, don't come back, we could have helped you. Kazar, meanwhile, has been convinced to do what JJJ wants him to, and he heads out to go and hunt Spider-Man, almost Craven style here. Right? But yes. So he goes and gets himself a rope with a grappling hook. Why would a construction site, I mean, I know why they might have a rope. Why would they have a grappling hook?
You never know.
You never know. You never know. So
they're building the Grappling Hook Museum of Manhattan.
Oh, well, then they've gotten the exhibits there really early. It looks like that building is not ready yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Spider-Man, meanwhile, then goes by John Jonah Jameson's office. He says, all I want is information, and basically, you're a newsman. You should be able to help me figure this out. JJJ figures out that this might be his chance to finally figure out who Spider-Man is, and makes it like he knows the guy and is like, oh yeah, go ahead and take off your mask. He's about to do it, and then in comes Kazar. So So Jameson is hoist on his own petard here, having set one thing loose to try and get Spider-Man, and then he had another chance, but then the first one ends up canceling out the second.
He says, go away, let me do it. It's my chance to really be a hero. He was just starting to trust me. And Kazar says, you told me to catch Spider-Man. And Jameson says, but I didn't mean right now.
So then there's a big epic fight scene that goes throughout the city, and we do indeed at one point see Zabu in the lobby of a building by the elevators, which is hilarious. In the end, Spider-Man ends up falling into some water, presumably in Central Park. Kazar swims in after him and pulls him out. It is implied here that Spider-Man has drowned, and Kazar is carrying his limp body out. And then it just says, you must be here next issue, which probably tells me they haven't figured out how they're wrapping this up yet. So yes. There we have it. Let's go ahead and turn it over to our guest first. Douglas, what are your thoughts that you haven't yet shared?
This is a weird issue. This is an issue that does not really advance the amnesia plot at all. Peter ends the issue exactly where he began it. He still doesn't know who he is. Well, I mean, he's got a little more. He's a little more waterlogged, but it's really in a holding pattern. And you have Kazar coming in to give it an action scene. He's got a grappling hook, so it can be a little bit more of a mid-air action scene, and eventually get him into not a concrete jungle, but at least there's some greenery around at Central Park. But there's nothing moving forward in this issue, which, considering where Amazing Spider-Man has been, even in the months leading up to this, is really unusual.
Yes. Well, is it because Vermita is pulling back? Is it because Vermita is focusing on the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine? What effect is that having? There was certainly no need to do another month of the Amnesia Pod or another 2 months of the Amnesia Pod, because it's still not over at the end of this issue. Although I wouldn't be surprised if suddenly drowning has somehow cured of him as amnesia. It's amazing the number of things in comics that can cure you of amnesia. I don't remember having, I haven't read these comics for a long time.
I also want to point out that in the letters column of the original issue, there is a letter from Peter Sanderson, who is yet another letter columnist in Amazing Spider-Man, who ends up becoming a full-time comics professional. And his letter is complaining about how Mysterio is not as mysterious as he ought to be if he's going to be Mysterio.
That's funny.
When was the last time we saw Mysterio?
It's a long time ago.
There's a lot of sort of stock Spider-Man moments in this. The collapsing Aunt May. How many times has Aunt May collapsed? The desperate Anna on the phone. The scheming J. Jonah Jameson. And there's not really a sense of forward motion in it, and that's strange. There's stuff happening on every page, but it feels like you could more or less jump past this issue and not really have missed anything except for, Spider-Man drowning and stuff.
Yeah, I say in my notes, fairly lame issue. Amnesia is lame and has lasted way too long. K-Star is always somewhat lame. The coming of Heck is tragic, but could be much worse. Don't want this story going on for another issue, I say. But in fact, we are going to get it going on for another issue.
Can I rise to the defense of Don Heck?
Yes.
There's somebody who used to refer to himself as the Don Heck Appreciation Society, and I'm not going to go quite that far, but Don Heck was a really, really interesting artist who was not meant to do superhero comics.
Right.
Mm-hmm. He did some gorgeous-looking, secret agent comics in the 50s. He did some absolutely amazing-looking horror comics. There's a comic called Horrific that he did the covers for, and the cover of every issue was just somebody's screaming head. And he was really great at doing that. He was solidly good at the storytelling aspect of stuff when he was doing layouts, but he's not doing layouts here. The actual rendering, if he has to do superheroes, he's not really feeling it. He'll do it, but he's not feeling it. And one of the tragic things about Don Heck's career is that he ended up being the person who was called on to do superhero stuff so often because he was fast. And that was where they needed fast artists who could come in and hit a deadline. And that meant that he didn't get to do horror stuff as much. A couple of years from now, he does a horror story in, I think, Tower of Shadows or something, and it looks great. Everything that is off-putting about his style when he's doing superhero comics works great when he's doing a horror story. But this just wasn't his kind of thing, and you can tell. That's my defense of Don Heck.
So I am somebody who actually owns the Don Heck art book, Don Heck, A Work of Art. And during the first 3 years of the Marvel Universe, so 62, 63, 64, I really, really like the work that he did in the Marvel Universe in those first few years, especially when Kirby was just cranking stuff out at such an unimaginable pace and being inked, I don't know, in some cases sloppily. The 1 or 2 Heck stories we would get in any given month would be like this little palate cleanser, this little breath of fresh air in the midst of overworked Kirby before they had really found their rhythm on stuff. So I endorse what you're saying about Heck. But as time went on, and as I think they were encouraging him to look more like Kirby, I think that ended up working against his strengths, and he ended up getting the reputation he has today.
I was noticing as I read this that you could see Heck in K-Star's face, but not in Peter Parker or J. Jonah Jameson's face. So it seemed that they were more concerned with having the regulars be on model and having, maybe Romita put a little more effort into the faces of the main characters, but not so much into K-Star's face, which looks like Heck.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Should we move on to Daredevil?
Let's please do.
All right. As always, we go from one of Marvel's best books to one of Marvel's worst books month after month when we start with Spider-Man and then go to Here Comes Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, number 37. Don't look now, but it's Dr. Doom bizarrely, Dr. Doom is here fighting Daredevil underneath a spotlight. In my notes, I tend to refer to people just by their initials, but this issue is DD versus DD, so I couldn't do that. Don't look now, but it's Dr. Doom. So they quickly explain the absolutely shocking and bizarre cliffhanger from last issue where Daredevil had a fight that took him all across town fighting the Trapster. They ended up on a subway tracks where we just found out from a thought balloon that the Trapster was arrested and taken off, but Daredevil was passed out on the subway tracks. Well, then who should show up but Dr. Doom? Well, they briefly explained in this issue that Dr. Doom was just sitting around listening to the radio like Dr. Doom does, listening to his favorite New York AM talk radio, presumably, I guess news radio. And then they went ahead and announced that Daredevil's fight had taken him to the subway tracks. And then Dr. Doom hurries over to the subway tracks to go confront Daredevil. Now, he had fought Daredevil in one of his previous appearances, so he's still jonesing for revenge. But this is the second storyline in a row where the villain announces, I really want to be fighting the Fantastic Four, but I'm going to sort of work my way up to them by fighting you.
Yeah.
The Trapster announced that, and now Dr. Doom is announcing that.
Matt, could you do the credits and title?
So let's pause just long enough to award a vote of thanks to Stan the Man Lee and Gene the Dean Colan for creating this contemporary classic, and to John Tartaglione, embellisher, and Artie Simek, letterer, and now it's action time. So Dr. Doom and Daredevil, DD and DD, fight each other for several pages. Crowd is gathering at the subway stop by this point and going like, oh, what's going on? But Dr. Doom has a little gun that creates a glass wall around him that keeps them from getting in, which is an odd little doohickey to have. Then he takes Daredevil out to his car, where he has, at least Dr. Doom is not driving the car himself, but it's even weirder to have like a little driver who drives him and some goons around while Dr. Doom sits in the shotgun seat. Where like it's like Dr. Doom riding around New York in his town car, riding shotgun while he's got a driver and some goons in the car.
Now, I would like to interject here that Dr. Doom explains that you need not concern yourself with petty traffic rules since we possess unlimited diplomatic immunity. I actually had a former State Department official on my own podcast a while ago, the Voice of Latveria podcast, to address the question of Doom's diplomatic immunity, because she's somebody who knows what diplomatic immunity can get you. Doom is in fact correct that diplomatic immunity can pretty much get you out of traffic offenses. Diplomatic immunity can't really get you out of felonies. Like, most of the stuff that's Doom stock in trade, diplomatic immunity is not going to help you with. But he's exactly right that, like, you know, a traffic violation, like, diplomatic immunity is going to be fine for that.
Yeah, I've heard that when the UN is in session, that New Yorkers get incensed at all of the diplomatic cars that just park wherever the heck they want.
Yeah. Okay, so then Dr. Doom tooling around town in his town car with Daredevil in the back seat. Daredevil's like, what am I going to do? They briefly get in a fight back there, and even the chauffeur is getting involved in reaching back and throwing haymakers with his right arm while his left arm is driving the car. But eventually the fight comes to nothing. They get to Dr. Doom's, I guess this isn't a castle, but it's a palatial estate on the edge of town, which is filled with all sorts of Doom-esque things like giant hanging chandeliers and bearskin rugs and things like that. And then they go ahead and throw Daredevil in a concrete cell, but then they let Daredevil escape so that they can put him in. This is sort of like they have in children's museums sometimes. They've got a gigantic room where everything is just a little bit too large to make Daredevil feel like a little kid. It's like the ultimate revenge. And then they put him in another room where everything is upside down and sort of bolted to the ceiling. This is similar to an old Mysterio Spider-Man comic that Ditko did. It's just bizarre ways to mock him. Then we get to one of the oddest moments in Marvel Comics, because of course one of the most famous moments in Marvel Comics is when Dr. Doom stole Silver Surfer's powers and Silver Surfer's surfboard, and then was tricked by Reed Richards into flying up to outer space and hitting the barrier that Galactus had put around Earth that keeps Silver Surfer in. And we never saw what happened. We just sort of heard the boom when he hit the barrier, and then we saw the surfboard return, and Reed sort of assumed that Dr. Doom was probably dead. Well, this is one of the great trivia questions, is in what comic did they reveal what happened next? And if you guessed Daredevil 37, then you get the QP prize. I have never read this comic. I had no idea they explained what happened next here. They basically explain that Galactus wherever he was, sensed what was happening and was like, uh-oh, I'm very fair and I don't like to punish people who I didn't actually punish. And so I'm not going to destroy Dr. Doom for trying to get through the barrier. I will gently place him back on Earth. So he did. It says, silently, with no show of emotion, he made one single gesture, after which he vanished. As for me, I found myself enclosed in a protective molecular bubble, which slowly transported me back to my kingdom of Latveria. So Galactus is very gently setting Dr. Doom down where he found him. And okay, I had no idea that this was ever explained. You know, I was like, next time Dr. Doom shows up in the Fantastic Four, I'm like, well, you know, he must have survived. But I had no idea this was ever explained. Anyway, they get in another big fight at the end, and then Dr. Doom announces he has invented a brain-switching machine. None but Dr. Doom has ever successfully created a workable body transferal ray. And it's like, yes, you have yourself earlier done body transferal back in Fantastic Four number 10. You had a whole brain-switching storyline back in Fantastic Four number 10. Don't you remember? I realize that was a long time ago. But now you're acting like you've just now invented body transferal. And it is later established you still have the body transferal powers that you got back in Fantastic Four number 10. So you invented this whole machine for nothing, Dr. Doom.
Well, you know, you can argue that perhaps Dr. Doom invented the ray to sort of mechanize the ovoid mind-switching trick so that he could switch the minds and bodies of other people. And, of course, he's testing it on himself because you're right. Okay, this makes no sense. Go on.
Douglas, what did you think of this issue?
God, Gene Colan draws such amazing action sequences. Absolutely gorgeous-looking action. He cannot, or at this point, could not pace a story to save his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The people who work well with Gene Colan are the people who give him page-by-page plots rather than, like, here's what happens in this issue plots. Gene Colan really loves drawing things like, you know, there's a car chase in this. Car chases in comics don't work. They work when Gene Colan does them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It is an absolutely thrilling, kinetic, wild car chase that goes on for like 4 pages. Great. But then you've just consumed 4 pages of real estate, and then you consume, you know, what is there, like a page and a half later of Dr. Doom, like, turning a switch, something like that, pushing a lever.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, Stan Lee feels obligated to fill every panel of this with chatter, which makes the action even slower than it would otherwise be. There is nothing approaching a subplot unless we don't see any of Foggy, we don't see any of the law firm, we don't see Matt out of his costume. It is just one big wild crazy scene. The spinning room, the upside down room, the what is this all here for? At some point Colan must have gotten the instruction to say, like, okay, we are finally going to follow up that how did Doom survive the end of that Fantastic Four story, as opposed to my favorite headcanon story, which is Doom did not survive the end of that Fantastic Four story, because there is no Doom. There is no Dr. Doom. It's just all the Doom bots that Reed Richards made to give himself a challenge. And this is another one of those. Sorry. That's some headcanon right there.
That is wild headcanon.
Yeah. It's great as a piece of action. As a story, I'm not so sure. How about you all?
The main thing that jumps out at me is that this is below Doom's dignity, in that he is basically taking... It's like, I'm going to rip off a little bit of Mysterio and a little bit of Paste Pot Pete and a little bit of myself and do this thing. And it's like, dude, you had the power cosmic. And now you are being like, you know what? Trapster came up with an idea and he wasn't able to pull it off, but you know who can pull it off? Me. It's like, why are you trying to pull off his plans? That just doesn't make any sense. One thing.
Yes, the issue ends with Dr. Doom going like, now I'm going to impersonate Daredevil in order to fight the Fantastic Four. And it's like, that just happened. That just happened last issue. The bad guy impersonated Daredevil in order to fight the Fantastic Four. Yes. Like, talk about repeated beats of all repeated beats.
I will say that this has a terrific payoff in Fantastic Four proper. It's a little bit ahead of you, but this will pay off there.
Okay. Good. I'll look forward to that. But one thing I will say about the pacing issues, this is one of the few issues where the splash pages don't make me say, why the heck is this one a splash page? The two splash pages we get are the introductory page to the story and then the story where we have Galactus engaging with him. Neither one of which made me blink in confusion. So I will give it that. Although, once again, John Tartaglione is not my favorite inker on Colon.
No.
Yes, not a big fan of Tartaglione's inks. Yeah, certainly satisfying splash page on page 16 where Doctor Doom essentially meets Galactus. Again, if you had asked me, where does Doctor Doom meet Galactus? Daredevil 37 would not have been my answer. But it's a big satisfying splash. It's a big ask for Cohen to draw, since he doesn't normally get to draw anything remotely like that in the comics he does. But he does a good job with it.
Yeah. So shall we move on to the Mighty Thor 149?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. When Falls a Hero. Now, this cover is a multi-panel cover. Do either of you have strong feelings one way or another about multi-panel covers?
I like this one.
Okay.
I like multi-panel covers occasionally. Gene Colan actually did some amazing multi-panel covers for romance comics when he was drawing them at DC. And, it's a fun little change occasionally.
So I guess just Jack Kirby giving himself another little challenge here from what he normally does. The Mighty Thor, When Falls a Hero, produced by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, as if you didn't know. Embellishment Vince Colletta, lettering Sam Rosen. Now come on, every second counts. So we're in the middle of Thor, who has been depowered other than his natural Asgardian strength. So he still has his natural Asgardian strength. He still has his hammer, although the hammer has no mystical powers to it at all, so it doesn't return to him. But this version of Thor is in the middle of a knockdown, drag-out battle with the Wrecker, who was just empowered last issue in a somewhat humorous sequence. Again, I love how the Wrecker looks when he's throwing his head back and cackling.
Yes.
Page 2, panel 3 is another one of those. We saw a couple of them in the previous issue. The Wrecker is able to knock out Thor because the Wrecker has Norn powers and Thor just has the natural strength of an Asgardian. Sif and Balder are watching this from some sort of closed-circuit TV thingamajobber that they've got in Asgard. They've got a particular name for it, but it is escaping me at this particular moment. But they're watching this happen and being like, okay, no, Odin, I know Odin is doing this for a reason, but this is going too far. We need to go and get him and show him what's going on. Loki is then like, no, you won't. So he goes and steals the mystic crystal that they're able to see this in. So now they won't be able to show Odin. The Wrecker, now that he's knocked out Thor, is just going ahead and doing straight up criminal stuff. He's robbing a bank. The cops are after him, and he's able to basically knock down a building on top of the cops. Thor comes in, and he's like, no, let me deal with him, even though I don't have my power. This is my duty to do this. So more just amazing action fight sequences there. In Asgard, Balder and Sif get to Odin. They're trying to plead their case. Odin is like, look, he's not going to die. No one on Earth can actually do anything that's going to be able to kill the guy. He's just got to learn his lesson. They're like, no, dude, you got to take a look at what's happening. So then they go back to the Mystic Crystal, and it is gone.
So I got to say, it's very big of Loki to see what side his bread is buttered on here and say, like, I guess I'm rooting for Wrecker in this confrontation. Because the Wrecker, stole these powers from Loki and stole Loki's hat. And then stole Loki's hat in order to impersonate him and steal the powers that Loki was trying to get for himself. But I guess Loki is then like, well, whatever.
Whatever gets the job done.
Whatever gets the job done, I guess if that's the best way for me to attack Thor, I guess, this very circuitous route to empower this random dude who attacked me and stole my hat. If he's now going to fight Thor, I'm on his side now.
It's not that different from when he created the Absorbing Man. So, why not? Balder asks that he and Sif, since he's like, okay, no, I get it. We're not allowed to go to Earth. You have forbidden it. I'm not going to go ahead and plead my case on there. How about if we go to the land of the Norns and we will go and speak to the Norn Queen and figure out what's going on there? And Odin's like, whoa, dude, you You really want to do that? That doesn't sound like such a good idea, but okay, sure. Yeah, I got no problem with it. So the Wrecker looks like he's about to defeat Thor once again back on Earth. And then, and Matt, this is one of the things that you sometimes complain about in stories, is that Thor then doesn't suddenly figure out how to defeat the Wrecker. He just finds another inner source of strength from his willpower to go ahead and push back this bulldozer the Wrecker is using, and then, knock the guy out. So
yeah, I mean, that happens a lot in Thor. Thor isn't much of a mystery solver. He's someone who just has to reach down in his well of strength even deeper than he's ever reached before and solve things. It's okay. I give him special dispensation to not figure things out.
Yeah, Thor is, I mean, he's not like Hercules, but he's also not as bright as some other heroes. More than Hercules, though.
Not like Hercules, who had to sign his contract with an X when he signed his life away to become ruler of Hades. Although then later, a couple months later, we saw him reading the Iliad for fun. So it's like, dude, you signed your name with an X. How are you literate enough to sit around reading Homer? I don't know.
Yes. The Wrecker at one point knocks down a whole tenement building. Once again, I think there's probably some lip service in there to this thing being demolished for a highway or something like that. Because once again,
you think climbing that condemned tenement is going to save you?
Yeah. Once again, Robert Moses gave Marvel a lot of cover for property damage in 1960s Marvel comics. So on the final page of this story, we see Balder and Sif entering into the Forest of the Norns, and it is very clear that this is a difficult mission under which they are undertaking. And then we see that the Wrecker is digging through the wreckage of the building that he just knocked down and finds what looks like Thor's lifeless body. But all is not yet lost. We hope, as we shall see with thee next ish. So,
as opposed to how Spider-Man ended, where we found Spider-Man's lifeless body at the end, and they implied that nope, he really was dead.
This is the same comic as that issue of Spider-Man.
It is. Except for Thor doesn't have amnesia.
Yes, but he's still powerless at the beginning, and he's still powerless at the end, too. So, Douglas, why don't you give us your thoughts on this story?
Oh, I mean, that's my thought. Like, it is the same thing as Spider-Man. It is a great big fight scene, this time executed by Kirby, who's absolutely amazing at doing fight scenes, with occasional cutting away to other bits of business that don't really go much of anywhere, and then at the end, like, oh no, our hero is dead-ish. Same thing. At least, we have the Inhumans at least as a little backup.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up Thor before we move on to the Inhumans.
Fair.
I just back up everything said. I think the 3-panel cover really works. I thought that Ditko was really good at 3-panel covers. Usually I don't like Kirby's 3-panel covers as much, but I think that this one, you get to see them fight and then you get to see Thor seemingly dead. It sort of sums up the whole issue. You say that Thor doesn't really do anything clever, but he does do one thing clever. He's sort of swinging around like Spider-Man, and he's holding on to a part of a excavator, and he swings over and he yoinks away the Wrecker's crowbar with his feet.
Yes.
So he's using his feet to grab the crowbar away from the Wrecker, which, briefly makes it look like he's winning the battle, and then the Wrecker just gets his crowbar back and goes back to beating up Thor, and it comes to nothing. But for use of his feet, I'll give him some cleverness points. Okay, should we go ahead and move on to the Inhumans?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. The origin of the incomparable Inhumans. Silence or death. And death is full Artie Simak there. Another Marvel masterwork by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, embellished by Joe Sinnott, lettered by Artie Simak, sound effects by Foghorn Forbush. So once again, we're going from Vince Colletta inks to Joe Sinnott inks, so that is always a jarring change in usually a good way. We saw in the previous issue that Baby Black Bolt cried for the first time and knocked down the entire building that he was born in. Our guest in the past 2 episodes, Jeff Ryan, pointed out that they later retconned that to where that had actually killed his own mother in the wreckage. But we have not yet gotten that tragic note just yet. But right now it seems that Black Bolt has been raised in what looks like solitary confinement up until he's like 18 or 19 here. and he's wearing his full Black Bolt outfit and with mask for reasons that are not entirely explained. But then at this point, they're like, okay, well, you've been basically raised in solitary confinement. So now that you have reached adulthood, we're going to introduce you to other people. So, hey, here are all your cousins, including your cousin Medusa. Like, wait, she's his cousin? Okay. Hopefully second cousin or third cousin. I'm hoping, but I don't trust that at all.
The ways of the Inhumans are different. We can't impose our normal morality on them.
Yeah, who's he going to marry? An alpha primitive? I mean, come on. So
this is the time when I would point out as an American what Eleanor Roosevelt's maiden name was. The joke here is that Eleanor Roosevelt's maiden name was Eleanor Roosevelt. They were cousins.
Anyway, he's meeting all of the teenage Inhumans, so we see beardless Gorgon, which is not quite as upsetting as beardless Hercules, but still a little bit odd. And Kirby does a neat job, and I guess we should probably give a fair amount of the credit to Sinnott, too, for making these all look like younger versions of the Inhumans, which is, a nice subtle thing to be able to do. Maximus shows up, though. He's like, yeah, no, we can't have this dangerous dude being king. I deserve to be king because I'm a genius. So he goes and gets some kind of pain weapon that he's shooting at Black Bolt, trying to get him to scream out in pain to show that he is not worthy and too dangerous to rule the Inhumans. And we see, once again, young Maximus with this huge grin on his face as he thinks that he is winning this thing here. In the end, though, Black Bolt does not cry out. Medusa is able to wrest this weapon away from him with her hair. Gorgon then stamps the ground and knocks him over. Karnak then juggles him, which does not seem like a Karnak power, but okay. Karnak, who has not grown his mustache yet. You would think that, a teenager, he might have that little peach fuzz thing going, but not yet. Anyway, so Maximus is quickly defeated, and then we see the anguish on Black Bolt's face, presumably because he's realizing for the first time that he can never, ever use his voice. He is going to be silent forever.
Yes.
Next, Triton and the Humans. So that is it. It doesn't really do that much for me here. Douglas, what do you think?
Here's my question for you. What do we know about these characters at the end of the story that we didn't know at the beginning?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, there's nothing. It is let's show these characters using their powers, but as teenagers, and also Karnak can juggle now.
I mean, I don't know. I like the story a little bit better than you guys. I like the idea. I think the focus of the story is just on Black Bolt's anguish, how painful it would be to first realize that you're in this situation. And I think that that's an interesting story. And I think Kirby and Sinnott do an amazing job showing Black Bolt's anguish. And his, the thing that always drives me nuts about Inhuman stories is that Black Bolt doesn't know sign language, or at least have a little pad of paper around his neck that he can write things down on. They always act like, well, you're essentially mute, so therefore you have no way of communicating. And it's like, there's written language, there's sign language, there's all sorts of ways that mute people can communicate with the world. And, it's funny, I've been rereading the 87th Precinct novels by Ed McBain, and these novels always begin with a little thing at the beginning going this book is based on research into police procedural matters. But one of the main cops in the books is married to a deaf wife. And every time he goes home to her to discuss the case, he discusses the case and she just sort of nods or shakes her head at various things he says. And she never communicates back to him in any way. And I'm always like, well, in all your research, you never discovered American Sign Language. And then I'm like, wait, was American Sign Language not a thing at this point? Were America's deaf people really caught in this sort of world where they weren't able to communicate anything more complex than shaking their head and nodding? And I'm like, because the research in these books is dead on, but Is he just dead wrong about this?
Yes, he is. Let me put it this way. We have a very good friend who's an ASL interpreter. One of the things about it is that the sign for woman looks like you're tying your bonnet on.
Huh.
Right? So that gives you an idea as to the vintage of American Sign Language. Right? Okay. It goes back to the 1800s or something like that. So, no, that's just not doing the research. I will say that in the deservedly maligned Inhumans TV show, Anson Mount in there as Black Bolt does use some sort of sign language when communicating with Medusa.
Okay, good.
And I think at some point somebody tried to establish that Inhumans have no written language because, like, it's all oral history. But that doesn't fly. That doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah. No, they're supposed to be this very advanced civilization. That makes no sense. Anyway, we should probably move on to Tales to Astonish.
Yes.
Anything else anybody has to say before we do?
Nope.
Okay, let's go and move on to Tales to Astonish, normally featuring separate stories featuring Submariner and the Incredible Hulk. But this time, it says on the cover, an epic-length 22-page battle, because we are combining Submariner and Hulk into their own story. There was a bizarre story a couple years ago where they almost ran into each other in their own separate books, but didn't quite do it. In this one, they finally meet up. Well, I say they finally meet up. This is not the first time. When we begin with Submariner sitting around in his headquarters watching video of the Hulk seemingly die in the nuclear explosion that he seemingly died in last issue, and saying, like, the Hulk plunging to his death atop a southwestern peak, but if I could save him, what an invincible ally he would be. And it's like, yes, like when you two joined together back in Avengers #3. Don't you remember that? And nobody ever mentions Avengers #3 in this book, and this is not the first time that people should have mentioned that, and they didn't mention it. That seems to have been a memory hold book. Yes, the credits. A double-ink spectacular to stagger your senses by Stan the Man Lee, Marie the She-Severin, and Dandy Dan Atkins, lettered by Sam Rosen. So we have, presumably, the usual penciler of the Hulk, Marie Severin, with the usual pencil inker of Namor's book, Dan Atkins, working together, and I think it works pretty well. I think that she is generally a rather jagged penciler. He is rounding her out in a way that is sometimes good and sometimes less good. He is adding a lot more depth and shadow to her with his sort of heavy inks, which I think is working well. I really like the shadows in this book. What did you guys think of this art combo?
I really like seeing the two of them together. Like, it's not a standard combination. I like Severin inking herself, which she almost never gets to do. But they're having fun. You can tell that they're really enjoying it. And
yeah,
I love that.
I generally really like the art combo. The one complaint that I have is that Marie Severin used Gene Colan's model for the Puppet Master.
Yes.
So he looks like Donald Pleasance or something like that, rather than like an evil marionette.
But the big problem with this issue, though, is, I think Marie Severin is a great penciler. I always love her pencils, but her plotting is never the greatest. I liked her plotting, to the extent that we should give her credit for the plotting of Doctor Strange. I think she really excelled at that. To the extent that we should give her plotting for the Hulk, it's a bit less so. And this is the most poorly plotted issue she has been involved with on either book. The whole job of a comics writer, as I've said on this podcast, is to get the hero and the villain in the same place at the same time with a reason to fight each other. And hoo boy, do we not have that. The whole idea of this issue is that the Puppet Master controls the Hulk to fight Namor, which is like, okay, not that long ago had Puppet Master controlling Namor to fight people. And again, it's not even acknowledged that that happened here. This isn't like a follow-up to that story. It's just like sheer coincidence that Puppet Master and Namor ran into each other again. And indeed, it is sheer coincidence. As Namor is flying to the surface to confront the Hulk, he just accidentally knocks over a boat that had the Puppet Master's people on it. So then at this point,
it's not like the ocean is very big. I mean, you're just going to run into, any ship that's there, you're likely to run into it. What is it? Like, 1/10 of the land surface, something like that. Yeah. Something.
7/10, 1/10, something like that. But, and then who is an old villain of yours that you just accidentally ruin the plans of by accident? There's so many better ways. The Puppet Master wants revenge on Namor. If he had sought out Namor, that would have made so much more sense rather than have them just happen to run into each other. Well, we've already established that Namor is specifically going to look for the Hulk. So in terms of how do you get your people together in the same room, they're already on a collision course with each other. But now Puppet Master is like, I'm going to control the Hulk and have him go find Namor. So at this point, they're both looking for each other for different reasons. And it's sort of implied that the Hulk would have remained buried under that mountain forever if not for the Puppet Master commanding him to free himself, which is sort of out of character for the Hulk. He finally gets out. As I saw you pointed out, Steve, we once again, for the 9 gazillionth time, have Thunderbolt Ross and Glenn Talbot hanging out on an army base when Rick Jones suddenly runs onto the army base and runs up to them and says, no, you can't attack the Hulk. It's like, how on earth does he keep getting on this army base?
Yes, well, as I've pointed out, I've taught software classes on Air Force bases in the past. There are all sorts of checkpoints and fences and all sorts of stuff that you need to go through to get there. How this kid hasn't just gotten himself shot at some point is a little beyond me.
That is Rick Jones' superpower.
Yes, it clearly is, absolutely.
So then the Hulk frees himself, and then Rick Jones tries to talk to him, and it's like, oh, show them that you're really a good guy, but the Hulk attacks Rick Jones because he's being controlled by the Puppet Master. Then, utterly bizarrely, this is tremendously bizarre. So at this point, Namor is looking for the Hulk. Namor knows that the Hulk is in the Southwest. The Hulk is looking for Namor. The Hulk presumably knows that Namor is based under the ocean. And so naturally, they both end up in Miami, Florida. What on earth? How do they end up in Miami, Florida? That's not where either one of them was going.
I know it's set in Miami, Florida. By the end of the issue, it was unclear to me whether they were supposed to be in like San Diego here, and they end up like knocking Submariner so hard that he lands in Miami. But then because I mean, honestly, that's what I was trying to figure out. I think that might be the best explanation for what we're gonna get here.
It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. After all this Stromendrang, after all this effort we put into getting these people in the same place at the same time, they get to fight. And then the issue is perfectly fine. And Miami is a cool location for the fight. Like, Miami makes a nice picturesque backdrop, and their fight takes them through resort hotels and things like that. It's a perfectly fine fight that goes on for, as they promise on the cover, a 22-page spectacular. But wait, we're not done with people not running into each other in the way they should run into each other. At the end, over the course of their fight, Namor creates a sort of tidal wave accidentally as part of fighting the Hulk. And then that tidal wave goes and knocks out the Puppet Master. Namor never even knows the Puppet Master is involved in this story in any way. And he accidentally antagonizes the Puppet Master at the beginning by sheer coincidence, and then he accidentally destroys the Puppet Master at the end by another sheer coincidence, a separate sheer coincidence. Absolutely atrocious plotting. If ever an artist were to go like, actually, I'm going to give Stan Lee credit for plotting this issue. He's the writer. Who am I? I'm just the artist. If ever an artist were to say, no, I didn't plot that issue, this would be it, Marie Severin, because this is one of the most atrociously plotted Marvel comics I've ever read. The Hulk eventually becomes Bruce Banner, which causes Namor to lose interest in beating him up, and that is the end of the issue. He abandons Bruce Banner lying on a beach, seemingly still in Miami. So, guys, let's start with you, Douglas. What do you think of this issue?
I'm going to point out one really interesting thing about this issue, which is I'm pretty sure it is the first time Marvel did a special thing for an anniversary issue.
Oh, that's an interesting point. This is issue 100.
And, Journey into Mystery 100 was not a particularly anniversary-ish thing. This time we've hit an issue.
The Galactus trilogy did hit Fantastic Four number 50, but they didn't really do that as a special celebration. It was more just, hey, here's the peak of what we're going to be doing in the 60s.
Right, yeah. The Galactus thing still reads to me like a two-part story that got stretched out to 3 when they realized how good it was.
Could be.
Starts in the middle of an issue, ends in the middle of an issue. But this one is like, okay, we've got some round numbers at the end of an issue. Let's do a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Let me look at my notes real quick. I say in my notes, they were looking for each other, right? Which is needless plotting. So how did they end up in Miami? ? They accidentally defeat the Puppet Master without ever knowing he's there. Atrocious plotting, period. Really terrible, period. Art is pretty good, period. Good long fight, period. So that was the end of my notes. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to X-Men number 41.
Yes, and this one is on me, unfortunately. On the cover, they're starting to focus on an individual character on the title. So it says, the X-Men bonus continuing the blockbusting origin of Cyclops. It says, now strikes the subhuman. And we have, I'm just going to say, not the best cover I've ever seen. It's a monochromatic cover, which is often an interesting way of doing things. But
Yeah, they tend to particularly like those on X-Men, and I like them. I like the monochromatic covers. It sort of makes sense. They're deep in a subway tunnel, and presumably there's just a little, red warning light that's lighting up the whole scene. I think it's makes for kind of a striking cover, so I'm not as anti the cover as you are. But as you know, I'm not a big fan of Heck, who presumably drew the cover.
Right. And just the subhuman is just not well rendered, and the Beast is supposedly just jumping at him, but seems to be changing direction mid-air while doing so. And those two things bother me. So, X-Men, the most unusual fighting team of all time, now strikes the Subhuman. Face front, because Stan Lee's creative combo of Roy Thomas and Don Heck has done it again. Done what? Don't bother asking George Tuska inker or Sam Rosen letterer, because they'll never tell. So, Heck inked by Tuska. We've seen him ink Kirby, we've seen him ink John Buscema, and we've seen him ink himself. So, going into this, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe this will turn out fine. But this initial splash page, just right off the bat, is like, yeah, no, we're not going to be fine.
See, I disagree. I like the Tuska Heck combo, even though I've been the one who's been complaining about Heck all episode. I liked the Romita Heck DeMeo combo in Spider-Man, and I think that Tuska is one of my favorite inkers on Heck. He really gives him some solidity. He gives him some roundness. He gives him some oomph. One of the things I dislike the most about Heck is how scratchy he is, and I find that Tuska's work on Heck is a lot less scratchy, so I like it.
Sure, I can see that. But I just don't like the design or the execution of the drawing of the Subhuman. At any point in this issue. We start out in a subway tunnel. We have this pale yellow creature with big red eyes and sort of a beetle haircut who is confronting a subway train, knocks the subway train off the tracks in actually quite a nice panel. Page 2, panel 3 is really well done, I will say. And, of course, who happens to be on the subway train but Hank and Bobby?
And their dates, Vera and Zelda.
Yes, indeed. And so the lights are knocked out, and so then they're just disappear and turn into their superhero selves. They go off.
And Roy Thomas, of course, feels the need to have them say, it's lucky that the prof taught us how to get around in the dark. Like, yeah, we could have guessed how they got around in the dark. You didn't need to set up that they had special abilities that are denied to normal mortal men.
Yes. And we see, Iceman uses an ice boomerang. Okay, that's nice. In the end, this confrontation goes more or less nowhere. The Subhuman, who they at one point describe him as looking grotesque, and he's like, yes, that is what I shall call myself, grotesque. But then when he calls himself that, it's spelled differently from when they called him that. So apparently we can tell how the spelling has changed when he speaks. This guy gets away. One thing I will point out, because as we find out he's part of an underground civilization, he has the same skin tone as both the Moloids and the Tyrannoids. So I'm wondering if this is a third subspecies of this same underground type of humanoid being.
Yes, good point.
Although I think the Moloids can't speak, the Tyrannoids can speak, and then these guys actually had their own civilization here, as we shall find out. So yes, it turns out that they were part of this underground civilization, and they were always warring with each other. So I guess there are multiple nations of these underground people, and their battles underground explain why we have volcanoes. I'm like, dude, don't do that. That's just don't. Please don't do that. That's not gonna help. Anyway, eventually their civilization was destroyed by, and I'm trying to remember, was this because of nuclear bombs up above or something like that? I forget exactly what it was, but one way or the other, their civilization is destroyed, and he blames the surface people.
Mm-hmm.
We cut to the danger room. As usual, the professor is trying to kill all of them. But then at one point, the professor sends everyone else away, but then keeps Jean there. And he at one point says, "You'll have to trust my judgment. The other X-Men must know nothing of that matter. And now, are you ready to continue our experiments?" She says, "Yes, Professor." It's just like, Ooh, in light of those 2 panels early on in the X-Men where he is pining for her, I really dislike that panel.
Well, no, they have a callback to
yes.
it then later on page 12.
They do.
Cyclops thinks, what's with the professor's sudden interest in Jean? Could it possibly be that he's in love with her just as I am? Like, well, you're a little late to the party, Cyclops, because he was, in fact, pining after Jean about 39 issues ago, something like that. But he thankfully hasn't mentioned it since, even in the thoughts that we are privy to.
Yes.
And you've got it wrong this time because there's something else going on.
Yes. And although I will point out that, if Professor X was having feelings for her, he never said anything to anybody and never acted on it. So,
Yay.
Much later on, Mark Waid actually addresses that head on when he's writing X-Men in the 90s.
Of course.
He has the professor sort of address, I had some inappropriate feelings, and boy, am I glad I never did anything about it.
At one point, I was talking to someone about how, it's never mentioned again. And they're like, no, when part of Xavier becomes Onslaught, who then kills all the Marvel heroes and triggers Heroes Reborn, they were saying like that was partially his repressed feelings about Jean that caused that to happen.
Ooh.
Then I was like, what? And then I never got a follow up from like the person online who said this or something like that. Douglas, you have read every single Marvel comic. Can you back him up?
It's not really that, but it is dealt with around the same time. So I can see how that got conflated.
Okay.
But no, like Onslaught is not like his gross feelings for Jean.
Which then kill off half the Marvel universe for a full year. Yeah, okay.
There is sort of a weird little homunculus involved with Onslaught, but that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there are some humans who are doing something with some sort of earthquake machine, and some of them are like, hey, yeah, I don't believe you've got an earthquake machine. You would have to prove it. Why don't you cause an earthquake? Which sounds like a really super dumb thing to say. But they go and demonstrate that it's like, oh, yes, I do have an earthquake machine. And, of course, Grotesk, the subhuman, feels this, and it's like, all right, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and take care of the surface people. This is right around at the same time that the X-Men return to the place where Grotesk had slipped back into the subterranean tunnels, and they are there to try to find him. So once again, they both decide to go after each other at the same time.
Yes.
The X-Men get down to his subterranean lair, and he is not there because he has gotten up to the surface and has grabbed one of the earthquake machine technicians. So the X-Men return to their headquarters empty-handed. There's a little bit more of the whole thing about like what's going on with the professor and Jean, but we don't really get much more about that. And then once again, this is just one of those issues where it's like, what is going on? So Grotesk is then confronted by Cyclops and Beast, who stops Grotesk from doing something to the earthquake technician. So next issue, the mind-staggering story you never expected to see and we never expected to print, the death of Professor X. So one of just many times over the Marvel Universe when they figure this guy's too powerful, we need to get rid of him, and then they always end up bringing him back.
Well, of course, this time he will remain dead for several years. This will be his longest death. And as we will eventually find out, Professor X was not actually in the issue we just read, that he was impersonated by the Changeling a couple issues ago, and he has in fact been the Changeling ever since. This is their way that they are going to get out of killing him off next issue and then bringing him back 30 issues later. Or, yeah, about 25 issues later, they're finally going to bring him back by explaining, no, the version of Professor X that was killed was actually the Changeling in disguise. But I am spoiling the next several years of X-Men comics for you, so I apologize.
It's a very kind thing to do.
Well, can you really spoil something that happened like 60 years ago? Okay, so Douglas, can I have your thoughts on Grotesk the Subhuman and the rest of this story?
Oh, do I have to? We got Frankenstein last issue, and we're getting Grotesk this issue, and this is not much of an X-Men story. This is a placeholder story. This is we have to do something to ramp up to the death of Professor X. But on its own, it is just boring. Like, eyes bounce off it.
Eyes bounce off it. I like that.
Yeah. This is a problem I have with a lot of 60s X-Men.
Yeah, the only thing that's interesting about this issue to me is Tuska inking Heck, which I think is a good combo and a good use of both of those artists. And I think Grotesk isn't the worst villain. You know, he's another subterranean who is upset about something the surface world is doing to affect his people and coming up to deal with it. But I think he's got sort of an interesting look. I think he's got sort of an interesting name. It is funny that, you know, the letterer of this issue has decided that his name should be spelled differently when seemingly he is completely unaware. Like, at some point he's going to see his name written down going like, wait, I didn't mean to spell it like that. What on earth are you even doing? But hey, it's up to Artie Simek, and that's what Artie Simek decided to do. Yeah, it's a perfectly okay issue, but we should, I guess, go ahead and cover the backup story.
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. The Origins of the Uncanny X-Men, The Living Diamond. We've got this guy who had his hands turned to diamond. Well, he's a mutant, and he's got some sort of mental-ish powers, and he can teleport, and he got exposed to some kind of radiation something that turned his hands into diamond. So,
yes,
really thematically coherent villain here. He's known as Jack of Diamonds at the moment, although that name will change by the end of this 5-page story. Stan Lee prestigiously presents a Roy Thomas Werner Roth spellbinding sensation. Thinking Inking by John Verpoorten, Better Letters by Sam Rosen. So, it looks like Jack of Diamonds' hands, in addition to being diamond hard, somehow give him super strength, unless that was already another mutant power that he had. We do, once again, establish that Professor X, at this point in time, had some kind of mental bolts that were part of his powers, that were not just mental talking to people's brains, but actually could have some physical effects on things, even though it's not straight up telekinesis. One way or the other, Scott Summers is under the influence, basically, of Jack of Diamonds. Professor X is trying to rescue him because he thinks that Scott is an innocent dupe in all this, and is indeed correct about that. But Scott is still helping Jack of Diamonds because he's afraid that Jack of Diamonds is going to kill people if he's left up to his own devices. So he's like, well, maybe I can use less than lethal force to go ahead and assist him so nobody gets hurt. And I hate saying Jack of Diamonds over and over again, but one way or the other, he gets into the nuclear facility where he had his hands turned diamond and is able to activate the machinery that is going to supposedly turn him entirely into diamond. Now, there's all sorts of other consequences that would come about from that might not be good, but, you know, we'll just forget that. Oh, yes, I had not noticed that Jack of Diamonds' his name is Jack Winters, and Scott Summers is Cyclops. So we've got Winters.
I hadn't noticed that.
That's terrible.
It must be there that I'll find Jack Winters and Young Summers. That's where you draw the line, Douglas.
Yeah, yep. You've hit my, yeah. Weird hill to die on,
okay.
Otherwise.
Yes. So anyway, in the end, Jack Winters' plan does go through, and he ends up turning his entire body into a diamond. So now he renames himself the Living Diamond. Next ish, the end or the beginning? Well, I guess we'll find out then. And, you know, Scott's still wearing his 2 sizes too small sweater to show off his guns that he apparently has been, exercising in the orphanage, I'm guessing. Hasn't gotten to a danger room yet. I don't know why he's so muscular, but anyway, that's it. I should say nothing else more about this. Either of you have any more kibitzing or kvetching to do?
Well, I should say that there's absolutely no reason he couldn't have just kept his name as Jack of Diamonds. Like, whether or not you have diamonds just for hands or your whole body is diamonds, you can still call yourself Jack of Diamonds. You don't have to change your name to the Living Diamond. But he felt the need for a name change shortly after already being introduced. That's about the only thing I have to say. What were you going to say, Douglas?
You mentioned that at this point, Xavier has some kind of telekinesis. I think it's not so much that... He never really had that up to a certain point that is way far ahead of where you have read. What makes more sense and is maybe more interesting is you could write these panels as not like, I used mental bolts to make the steel support miss me, but I used my psychic powers to make him think I'm 10 feet to the east of where I am.
Right.
Yeah.
That would have been a lot easier and a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
So I believe that we have reached the end of this particular episode, but not the end of this month of Marvel Comics. We shall get to the rest of them in the next episode. Anything either of you has to say about what we've done so far before we sign off for the time being?
I don't think so.
Nope. I think this has been 5 interesting comics. None of them were all-time greats, but they all were worth reading for various reasons. But they all had fatal flaws that I think we have already enumerated over the course of the episode. Thor was probably the best of them. Maybe you could say Thor didn't have a fatal flaw, but it wasn't the all-time greatest issue of Thor.
Okay. In that case, let's go ahead and call this one, and we will be right back in 1 week with our follow-up episode. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We always appreciate it. Take care and stay safe out there.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.